This is McCall's pattern 6228, Misses and Men's lined vest with 8 views. We will be doing view C. On the front guide sheet, I have circled the diagrams for the layout of the vest, the lining, and the interfacing. The back of the guide sheet continues step-by-step sewing directions. The vest uses pattern pieces 3, 4, 8, 9, and 10. The lining uses pieces 4 and 11. The interfacing uses pieces 8 and 10. Pattern pieces 4, 8, and 10 are used twice. There is only one pattern piece included in the pattern, so you use those pieces twice. The first step is to complete the vest and lining darts on the back pattern piece number 4. I used tracing paper and tracing wheel to mark the darts. I went over the darts with a chalk pencil so that I could see the lines better for sewing. Line up the marks on the 2 legs of the darts and pin. Both of the darts have been pinned. To sew the darts, back stitch at the wide end of the dart and sew to the point. Tie the ends of the darts. Press the darts flat and then press towards the center. Interface the welt pocket, pattern piece number 8, and the front lining, pattern piece number 10. Trim iron-on interfacing about 1/4 of an inch before ironing on to reduce bulk in the seam. Fold the welt in half lengthwise, right sides together. Stitch the ends, taking a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and end. Pay attention to the angles of the seams. Cut the corners diagonally. Fold the back belt, pattern piece number 3, in half lengthwise, right sides together. Stitch the raw edges together, taking up a 3/8 inch seam allowance, leaving the end nearest the notch free. Cut corners diagonally. Turn the welt right side out. Press, pushing out the corners with a point turner. Turn the back belt right side out, using a tube turner to turn and push out the corners. Press. Use pins to mark placement of the welt pocket at the bottom corners of the welt. With right sides together, pin the welt to the vest front, having raw edges of the welt extending 3/8 of an inch above the placement line markings. Use the 3/8 inch basting stitch to line up the pocket. Stitch 3/8 of an inch from the raw edge just below the basting line of the stitching. Backstitch at beginning and end. Press the welt up, covering the raw edges. Edge stitch the short ends of the welt to the vest front. Backstitch at the beginning and end of the narrow seam. Pin mark the placement for the back belt. On right sides of the vest, pin the back belt ties between the pin markings. Baste the belts to the side edges of the back between the pins, having the seam of the belt toward the lower edge, and the raw edges of the belt at the fabric edge. Pin the vest front section to the back vest section at shoulder seams, matching the notches and seam edges. Stitch the front to the back at 5/8 of an inch, back stitching at beginning and end. Press the shoulder seams open. Pin the interfaced front facing number 10 to the front lining number 11, right sides together, matching notches. The piece will not lie flat because of the curved seams. Stitch the front lining to the front facing with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and end. Press the seam towards the lining. Pin the front lining to the back lining at the shoulder seams. Stitch the front lining to the back lining at the shoulder seams and press the shoulder seams open. Pin the lining to the vest right sides together, matching notches, centers, and seams. At the lower back, match the darts that are pressed towards the center. Match the shoulder seams and pin the armholes. Pin the front of the vest as shown, matching seams and notches. Do not pin the straight side seams of the vest, front and back. Stitch all pinned seams at 5/8. Grade seam allowances by cutting to graduated widths, with the lining being the shorter seam. Clip curves at armhole and neck edge. Cut corners diagonally. Turn the vest right side out, pulling both fronts through one side of the back, first one side, then the other. Push out all of the seams, curves, and corners. Press the seams, rolling the seam edges to the lining so that the lining fabric does not show on the vest front. Pressing the vest does take time, but it is worth it at this point in the construction of this vest. With right sides together, pin the vest front to the vest back at sides, matching notches and armhole seams. Then pin lining front to lining back, above and below the seams. Stitch side seams at 5/8 of an inch, leaving an opening. Press the seam allowances toward the front of the vest. Pin the side opening in the lining. Slip stitch the opening edges together. To make the buttonholes, baste 5/8 of an inch from both center front edges on the front of the vest. Using the vest pattern piece, pin mark buttonhole markings at beginning and end of mark, lining pattern up at the dotted seam line. Remove the pattern piece and draw the buttonhole ladder with vertical and horizontal chalk markings for buttonhole placement. Always make a pattern piece practice using a similar marking to make sure the buttonholes work and your buttons will fit your buttonhole. Follow the directions in your sewing machine manual. Practice your buttonholes. Open a practice buttonhole using a buttonhole opener or a seam ripper. See if your button fits your buttonhole. Make the buttonholes on the right side for women's vests and on the left side for men's. Line up the center front basting lines on the right and left vest fronts. Pin mark placement for buttons. Place pin markings on the 5/8 inch basting line. Sew your buttons using a horizontal stitch for horizontal buttons. Remove all basting and markings. Use the belt pattern to pin mark placement for a buckle. Place the pin marking over the buckle. Fold your buckle over and pin. Stitch buckle in place. Do a final pressing and the vest is complete.